Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy to be with you on a Friday, as it is this week. Not a Tuesday. You probably know that already by looking at a calendar. It is, in fact, Friday. The somewhat comedy of errors continues in terms of scheduling, but this one worked out just a little later this week than we expected. So the migraine got in the way again with the scheduling last weekend, and then we had one minor glitch this week. So putting this up today instead of Tuesday, which is great, just gives me a different day to talk to you all. Hope that you've had a good week. Ours continues to be busy, and we should be slowing down next week sometime. We've had so many visitors and so much going on, and my body has decided that it was the perfect time for a week-long migraine, as you know, so that has been a challenge. But we're not here to talk about my migraines. We're here to talk about a book and an author. Today I am speaking with author Roger Leslie about his memoir, Light Come Out of the Closet. As I said at the end of the last episode, this talks about his experiences as a teenager, growing up in the 70s, realizing that he was gay, being very involved in the Catholic Church, trying to figure out what that meant to be spiritual, Catholic, gay, and what did that mean for him as a teenager, as a person raised in Catholicism, as someone who realized that they were gay pretty early in their life. So let me go ahead and give you the description of the book. That description is as follows. How do we live with a God or ourselves if who we are dooms us to hell? As a joyful boy who realized I was gay, I fought for my happiness and faith as prejudices of family and religion isolated me from the world. Battered and withdrawn, could I rediscover the God of love I first learned about as a boy? In the process, could being gay be the gift that introduced me to my soul? In the dark night of our soul, we find our own light. So again, that is Light Come Out of the Closet. I forgot to give you the subtitle. It is Light Come Out of the Closet, Memoir of a Gay Soul. It is by Dr. Roger Leslie. And again, it outlines this whole process of coming to terms with his sexuality and his spirituality and what that meant in terms of his relationships. Not only his physical relationships, his platonic relationships, his romantic relationships, but also his spiritual relationship with God and what that meant. So I'm not going to blather on too much about it because I could go on and on about a lot of different things that I would be on my soapbox about. If you have listened to this podcast for a while, you know I've got some experiences in my own past that color my understanding of different things, especially these two topics of sexuality and religion. But this book is so beautifully written, and Roger does such a wonderful job, of course, telling you about his experiences, that there is no point in me telling you about them when he can do it so much better. So let's go ahead and turn to the interview. Again, the book is Light Come Out of the Closet, Memoir of a Gay Soul, and the author is Dr. Roger Leslie. Hi, Roger. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad that you are here, and I'm excited to talk about your book. But before we do that, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you, that would be great.
So I knew I wanted to be a writer since I was 13 years old. I believe that my life has followed several fateful detours, and those detours took me into careers as a teacher, a professor, a librarian, I am now currently a full-time writer as well as a publisher of my own books and other authors' books, as well as an editor and a writing coach.
Wonderful. And what type of a librarian were you?
I was a high school librarian in Texas.
Okay. My dad was a K-12 librarian, so I have a soft place in my heart.
Librarians are great people. They're so open-minded and interested in everything. I love librarians.
Yes. And what was your well, I mean, it depends on the kid, obviously, what they like to read, but what was one of your favorite books to recommend when kids asked you what they should read?
So I usually steered them into the self-help section because I'm a big believer in inspiration and motivation and finding your own path through life and living the life you dream. So I usually steered them in that direction and let them know what a great variety of books are out there of great thinkers who had different perspectives on the world that they might adopt for their own.
Oh, I love that. And then they can kind of go, they can take from that whatever they need to at that moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, as I said, we're here to talk about your book. It is a memoir. It is called Light, Come Out of the Closet. Before we do that, but would you give an overview of the memoir?
Sure. So when I was young, I was raised by very dedicated parents. I have a wonderful family. And I was given a really strong moral education from my parents, from society, and from the parochial school I attended. Unfortunately for me, realizing very young that I was gay seemed to put me in that place in between where I didn't fit. And I was a big people pleaser, a very adult pleaser as a child. I wanted nothing more than my parents and teachers to be proud of me. And I could not reconcile how I could work so hard to do everything I was taught to do that's right, and that by virtue of how I was born, that would negate all of that and make me unworthy of love. And so the memoir is that journey of how I took from the time I was about 11 until I had an epiphany when I was 17 that changed everything and gave me the direction of my life.
And you do such a wonderful job crafting and telling the story that I just wanted to go back in time and hug you, although your family was not demonstrative, so you probably would have really freaked out about this random woman who appeared out of nowhere from a time machine. Mentally, I was hugging your young self. You did such a wonderful job of telling that story and how uncomfortable you were in trying to figure everything out in terms of your sexuality, in terms of your spirituality, something that is hard for any age, I think. What prompted you to decide to write about these specific years?
So after I had the big epiphany, that's the climactic scene in the book, I pretty much set behind me the religion of my childhood and realized, oh, that's not a good fit for me. But as a spiritual person, I always pursued wanting to be involved in some church or follow some spiritual path. So I left the religion of my childhood behind me and pursued other things. And for the longest time, for many years, I remembered that period of my life as very painful. And I connected that pain with the religion of my youth. As I've gotten older, I started to explore the possibility that maybe the religion of my youth helped set the moral foundation that gave me the strength to take my own spiritual path and follow it as I saw fit. And so rather than wanting to avoid or not go back in time and think about what that religion had done to me at the time, I began to want to explore, how did it bless me? How did it benefit me? And that's what took me back to this memoir. I thought, I'm going to retrace those years, retrace the experience, and find out and make peace with that piece of my childhood that I've always remembered as so painful and so dark because I was so depressed and lonely at the time.
And so I would imagine then that was the approach you took when deciding which stories, which memories you would share in this, kind of through that lens of re-examining those experiences. Is that kind of how you went about choosing which experiences to share?
That was part of it. And, I am a fiction and nonfiction writer. And in fiction, you want to keep mounting the tension. You want to keep building the suspense. And so what I did in the early part of the memoir is much what I would do in a novel. And that is find those pivotal moments that made my life more and more complicated. The reaction my mother had when she saw a lesbian wedding on the late night TV show, some of the comments that my great aunt and my relatives made about gay people when I didn't even know what that was. Those were the details that shaped who I was and led me to go deeper and deeper into my own spiritual closet because I was afraid of being found out. So I picked those pivotal moments that led me in the direction that I took. And at the time, because I didn't have the resources, because I was just a child, I didn't realize that through my choices, I was creating the tension. I was creating the difficulty in my life. It was up to me to resolve that conflict within myself and then let other people handle it as they would.
I'm going to jump in here so we can take our first break of this episode, but keep this conversation in mind when we come back because there's a story that we talk about that I think illustrates what he is speaking about in terms of resolving the conflict, letting other people kind of take it as they will, and how that affected his life. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Roger Leslie. We were talking about his memoir, Light Come Out of the Closet. He was talking about his experiences during a particularly dark time in his life and how he made some very specific choices as to what to do about those experiences. We're going to pick up that conversation with a specific instance that he mentions in the book. So with that reminder, let's go ahead and return to the interview. And you do a great job of showing that there's one story where you're on a field trip and you decide that you're just going to be alone and you're not going to talk to anybody and you just made yourself miserable. Do you think that you would have continued that pattern? I mean, I think the move to Texas in the middle of your high school career maybe was a turning point for you. Do you think had you not made that move, you would have taken a slightly different approach, or do you think that turning point was coming either way?
I think moving to Texas helped save my life because my freshman year, as you know, having read the book, I did everything so poorly. Toward the end of my 7th and 8th grade years, I realized for sure that I was gay, and I realized because I admire smart people that my friends were going to figure it out because they were intelligent. So gradually, as I express in the book, I kept getting rid of friend after friend after friend until I was completely isolated. Then when I got to high school and I started my freshman year, I did everything wrong. I didn't know how to connect with people. I didn't know how to be myself. And so when I found out near the end of my freshman year that we were moving to Texas, it was such a blessing. It was like, oh my goodness, I get to start over. I did things so poorly that I didn't know how to fix things where I was. But knowing that I was moving to another part of the country where I knew nobody and where nobody knew me, I could recreate who I was and what I wanted to be. So I think that turning point happened and because of the move, and it freed me to find some strength I didn't know I had.
Which is wonderful. I mean, a move like that often at that kind of pivotal stage of development and adolescence can be a negative thing. So it's really great that for you, it was the turning point you needed.
Absolutely. Yes.
No. So what did you take away from your experience writing the book? Did you come to any major revelations about that time period or how it affected the rest of your life?
I believe that everything that we experience is a matter of perspective, and that one way we can heal some of the pain from the past is to simply change our perspective on what it did and who we became in the process. And that's what part of the healing process for me in writing this book is I really did come to terms with some things in a very painful stage of my life. And I realized how much of my happiness today I owe to having gone through that experience. You know, I refer to that experience, those years, as the dark night of my soul. I felt so lost because I didn't know how to make anything better. I was only, 11, 12, 13, and I didn't have the resources at the time. And now, after having gone through that and then reached the point where I emerged from it, everything I have faced in my adult life since then has paled in comparison. And I've been through some really traumatic experiences in my life. My husband and I were in our house when it was blown away by a tornado. The roof was literally torn off over us as we were huddled in the bathroom there. I survived that. We were in a train derailment in England. We've been through some really traumatic experiences, but even those traumas, compared to what I went through when I had no resources and I didn't know how to handle anything when I was a tween and a teenager, they've paled in comparison. It's like, once I lived through that, nothing else can hurt me the way that did.
Wow, that's amazing. What do you hope readers might take away from the book?
So my mission in life is to inspire people to live the life they dream and to empower them to follow their own spiritual path. And so I hope my readers will take from this experience that whatever path they choose, it is the right one for them, and their decisions day to day determine where their future is going to take them. I hope this is a book of empowerment for many people to realize that whatever life gives you, whatever you're dealt at the very beginning of your life, you can use that as a pivotal jumping off point to fly.
Thank you for that. One thing that I really appreciate from my own reading of the book at the end, when you're doing the afterwards and kind of saying where people are and some of the things that have happened to you since this time period, you mentioned that people often comment that you're one of the most positive people that they know. And when you read this book, seeing that struggling, unhappy young man, it's hard to, I would imagine as that young man, it would be hard for you to picture the adult that you are now. So it's just wonderful that you were able to come out of that experience and turn that into positivity.
I think I owe that difficult period to my determination that once I survived that, once I got through that, I realized I can choose to feel however I want to feel every day of my life. And it's essential for me when I wake up in the mornings to choose how I'm going to be that day. And I owe all that to that period when I thought I was hopeless and helpless. That was the incorrect thinking process that I had as a boy. I really thought there was no hope for me because I didn't choose my sexuality. I just discovered it, realized it, and then realized if I was going to be happy, I needed to come to terms with it. Because, Sarah, what made me most depressed, I realized, was not the fact that I was gay, but the way that I had interpreted what that meant told me I could never be loved. And imagining a life, an entire lifetime without love, was what led me to be so depressed and even, as you know, suicidal at some periods in that time. That was the biggest factor. I was afraid I would not be able to love somebody and somebody would not be able to love me.
And it doesn't help when you are immersed in a system that is telling you that the very way you've been made, the very way that God made you, you're being told you're going to burn in hell for all eternity because
exactly.
On the one hand, you're being told that you are a child of God. You are made in the image of God. And then on the other hand, but.
Yes.
So it's always been a big disconnect for me. So trying to work through that as a teenager, I can only imagine, was extremely difficult.
confusing because I didn't know anybody that I could talk to about it. As you know, the people that I described in my life were wonderful people. And I really think that's one of the reasons that the book comes across as lively as you mentioned that earlier is because I was surrounded by so many fascinating people in my life. They make great characters. I could write a novel about any one of these people in my life, and they're so alive but their influence was so powerful on me. And I thought of myself as small and inconsequential and not very strong. And I saw their presence as, oh, they know better than I do. Well, I came to learn that only I know best what's best for me, as is true for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Time for our second break of this episode, but when we come back, a pretty amazing story about Roger's first memoir and how that memoir came to be. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I'm speaking today with author Dr. Roger Leslie. We are talking about his memoir, Light Come Out of the Closet. This is not his first memoir. Let's go ahead and return to the interview so he can tell you about how that first memoir came to be. You talk about writing in the book and how much you wrote in various capacities. Is this your first memoir? Have you written other memoirs?
This is my first memoir was my first last year, and that's my most successful book to date. And I've created classes, FLY, F-L-Y, first last year courses as a result of that, living that first last year. And the premise of that book is I had a dream where I was told to live the next 365 days as if I would never experience those calendar dates again. Now, I wasn't told for sure I was going to die within a year, but I was told to live as if I could and then write a book about it and then teach others how to do it too. So that was a memoir of that 1 year in my life. And that book came out in 2015.
Wow. I'm just imagining waking up from that dream and probably there would be a few swear words going through my brain.
So a lesson that I teach people when I do my inspirational courses and when I, do any coaching, I'm a big believer in take inspiration to action. So as soon as I woke up from that dream, I knew I needed to run to the computer, record everything I dreamed as vividly as I could describe it, and then begin living it that very morning. I had the dream in one November, and the librarian brain in me thought, well, wouldn't it be very neat and organized if I waited to do this starting January 1st? That's only a month and a half away. But I knew deep down in my soul I needed to start it immediately, and I did, and that made all the difference.
Yeah, I think I probably would have had the same thought. No, I'll just start January 1st, and then it's very easy to just let the urgency, not the urgency, but the immediacy taper off if you've done that.
Exactly.
What did your husband think when you told him about the dream and that you were going to start this process?
He's always been very supportive, and he was right on board the very first day. He was a minister, and so we were heading out to a Renaissance festival several hours from our home. And so on the way, I told him about the dream, and then we started setting goals right there. It's just like, well, what do we want to do to make sure that by the time we get to the end of our lives, we look back and we think, I'm so glad I did that when I had the opportunity. And so he was on board from the very beginning.
Perfect. He sounds like a wonderful partner.
Oh, he's great. We will be celebrating 40 years together next year.
Congratulations. That's wonderful.
Thank you. And we have 2 children and 5 grandchildren. We are the luckiest people in the world.
Yes. Wonderful. Oh, grandchildren. So much fun. Spoil them and send them home.
Which is exactly like being a librarian. You know, people ask me, what was the difference between being a teacher and being a librarian? I said, the great thing about being a librarian is like being a grandparent. You can have the kids with you when they're good. And as soon as they start acting up, you can send them back to class.
Exactly. I think my dad would agree with that. Are you working on anything new now?
Yes. So I'm always working on several books. I've got a Christmas novel that my editor is looking at right now. So I've done the several drafts of that book, and that book will either come out this Christmas or next Christmas, depending on what my publicist thinks would be the best way to market it. And I'm also working on a series of books related to living the life you dream and following your own spiritual path. So there are nonfiction books and fiction books. I'm always in the process of developing both.
And I'm new to you as an author, so I haven't read any of your fiction. What type of fiction do you like to write?
Usually historical fiction, very much like Light Come Out of the Closet. They're family dramas. They are intimate stories that take place within a family, and how something that occurs changes how the family understands who they are to themselves and to each other, and very often in a historical context. So I have a series that will be coming out in a few years. I've written the first draft of all 4 books, and they follow 5 sisters through the 20th century at different decades. Your
brain sounds like a very detailed place. If you have got 4 rough first drafts, you're working on a memoir, that's amazing. How do you keep it all straight?
You know, one gives me a break from the others. So, you know, I'll work on whatever I'm working on. First of all, whenever I'm inspired to write a book, I just begin it. I don't outline it. I don't spend a lot of time. And this is something I teach in some of my writing classes. You know, they say there are two methods of writing. You can either dive right in or you can outline. And a lot of it depends on how your brain works. More left-brained people like the outlines. More right-brained people like the creative process of just diving right in. I'm pretty extreme, both sides of my brain. The left brain side of me, very librarian, very organized, very like things structured. I like a very neat environment to write in, no clutter on my desk. But the writing side of me, the first draft side of me, the right brain, loves the creative adventure of just starting something and seeing where it takes me. That's the excitement for me of being a writer. So I think that's how it happens. It's just like one gives me a break from the other. I'll write. I always begin my day by writing a first draft of something, and that employs mostly my right brain. And then I'll take a break, and then in the afternoon I'll work on something like revisions of a book, or working on some of the marketing or some of the campaigns for the published books that I'm working on, something like that. So I just kind of balance everything so that I can get it all keep it all moving consistently till everything is out and reaching the public.
Yes. You wrote your first novel as a teenager.
Yes.
So what was the push to finally make you decide, yes, I'm going to write, but I'm going to try for publication this time?
So with that first book, I did try to get it published, but I didn't know what I was doing. I was 17 years old. I didn't have an agent. I didn't really know much about the process. So I looked up a few publishing houses in New York and I sent them. This was of course pre-internet, because this was back in the 70s. So, I found some books that told you how to write a cover letter and how to submit something. I didn't get any interest from the publishers. A few sent me rejection notices. Some just ignored my submission altogether. But I knew that's what I wanted to do. That was my passion from the beginning. And I determined that I was going to become an author. That was my dream job. So I just continued. And it took a long time. I think if I knew at age 13 that my first book wouldn't come out until I was 31, it might have been too daunting a goal, but I didn't know that. So I just kept trying and trying. And then every little bit of feedback would help. Like one time I just kept submitting, writing new books and submitting more. And I met with an agent one time and he said, I want to meet with you in person. I like what you've written. And I was very enthusiastic. I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to finally be it. And I met with him in person and he said, Roger, I really like what you've written. You show the potential for great talent, but this isn't the book. He said, my recommendation is don't even revise this book. Put this one away somewhere. Start the next one. You'll get there. You're just not there yet. So in the immediate, of course, I was discouraged, but there were always those little spikes to the journey that led me to take the next step, to try one more thing, to not give up, to have that perseverance, to keep trying until I finally reached the goal that I had wanted, and that is to be a published author.
On that very positive note, we're going to go ahead and take our final break of this episode. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Before the break, Dr. Roger Leslie was talking about becoming a published author and the process of that, and how he's not sure what his 13-year-old self might have thought if he knew it would take him until his 30s to actually publish his first novel. Let's go ahead and return to that conversation and the interview. There's always those questions, if you could go tell your 13-year-old self, whatever year old self, anything, what would it be? In your case, saying your first book doesn't get published till 31 would probably be a bad idea because you might not have taken the same steps, the same process.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I were asked that question now, and I would say this to any listener, trust your intuition, trust your journey. If you chose something for your life, whatever it is, there's a reason you chose that. Just follow through, keep going, take another step every day, a little step consistently, and you will get where you want. You will live the life you dream. And ultimately, you will realize you already are living the life you dream just by being on the journey to getting where you want to go. The happiness is not at the end of the journey. The happiness is the journey.
Mm-hmm. And actually, that's a very nice segue. Thank you. Because I know that you are a writing coach or writing teacher. So in addition to what you just said, what would be your advice for aspiring authors?
So I usually, when I teach my classes and I do my coaching, I usually start with two basic tenets of writing. One, in your first draft, don't get it right, get it written. The biggest mistake aspiring writers make is they write and edit simultaneously. That thwarts the creative process. You don't know what to edit until you get to the end of the book. And that's true for fiction and nonfiction, because all the elements of fiction are leading up to the big climactic scene at the end of the novel. And in nonfiction, everything is leading up to your big major point that expresses your theme of the book. So in the first draft, don't get it right, get it written. Just keep moving forward, keep moving forward. Don't revise until you get to the end of that first draft. And then the second bit of advice is rewriting is also real writing. There were many years when I just thought, if I'm revising something, this is not really writing because I've already written it. Now I'm just working at it and revising it. But I realized that I'm employing a different part of my brain and it takes a different level of skill. And the revision process the purpose of the revision process is to take what makes sense to you in the first draft so that it can make sense to your readers. That's why you need to revise. So those are the two major tenets I share. In the first draft, don't get it right, get it written. In all subsequent drafts, rewriting is real writing.
I like it because those are nice plays on words, which makes them easy to remember. When you take the time to read for yourself, and I'm sure you have a lot of authors that you enjoy, as a writer and a librarian, you probably have a whole list, but who are your go-to authors and genres when you read just for you?
So with nonfiction, I like spiritual books and I like self-help books. So anything inspirational, especially people who have unique ideas or go out on a tangent and think or perceive the world in a way that I hadn't thought about it before. I find those very inspirational. And with fiction, I really love classic fiction. I was a literature teacher for many years and I continually set goals to read, every classic that I could. In fact, last year I posted on Facebook, I bought a coffee mug at Barnes and Noble that was it had a picture of the bridges of classic books all around the edge of the cup. And I realized there were 6 books left on that book, that cup that I had not read. So that year I just said, okay, my next goal is I'm going to read these 6 books so that I can say I have read every single classic on this mug. So classic fiction and inspirational and motivational self-help.
Do you have a favorite classic book, do you think?
I have a few. The Great Gatsby, I first read it when I was 17. That book changed my life. It was so beautifully written. And at the time, I was so lonely that I identified with Gatsby's loneliness. I just connected with that book on such a deep level that book, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Carson McCullers' The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, those 3 books of classic literature really stayed with me for years and years. And those are books that I'll reread every couple of years just because at every new stage of my life, I find something new in them that I hadn't gotten out of it before.
Okay, thank you. How about internet presence, website, and any place on social media people can find you?
Sure. So my website is my name, Roger Leslie, ROGERLESLIE.com. And on that homepage, if you want to subscribe to my email letter, I send out inspirational emails. All my books are listed in the book section of that. Light Come Out of the Closet is now featured on the homepage. And I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram. Although I don't post much on Instagram, I am on it. So yes, social media wise, people can find me just about anywhere. It's usually under Dr. Roger Leslie if they're going to look for me. Most of my handles are Dr. Roger Leslie because I do have a PhD.
And there's probably more than one Roger Leslie out there in the world.
Correct. So either if you look up author Roger Leslie or Dr. Roger Leslie, you'll find me.
Okay. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you had wanted that you would like to highlight at this point?
I just want to encourage all your listeners, no matter what your dream, whether it has anything to do with writing or not, that you were born for a reason, that everything that comes to your life is a gift that's helping you to fulfill that reason. And you get to decide what you're passionate about. You get to decide what your mission is. And once you decide, everything you need to make that dream come true will already be there. Because I believe that the inspiration for any idea is not the beginning of the journey. That inspiration comes midway through the journey, and life has already set up all the people and things you need to fulfill your dream by the time you figure out what it is. So whatever you might dream, go for it, trust your intuition, follow your path, and make sure you enjoy the journey along the way.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining me, for taking the time out of your day to talk about Light Come Out of the Closet and writing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And just so the listeners know, you can pre-order the book now. The actual launch date is June 6th. So, the books will be going out on June 6th. So if they want to order the book ahead of time, we have it on super sale right now. The Kindle's only 99 cents and, it's also available in paperback. So if your readers are interested in the book and they want to pre-order it or order it on June 6th, through Amazon, they can just find my Amazon page. It's Light Come Out of the Closet by Roger Leslie.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Roger for joining me to talk about this memoir and his experiences, just being so open and honest and sharing about some conversations that are sometimes hard for people. Religion and sexuality are things that we don't often talk about easily with people. So thank you to Roger for sharing his experiences and sharing this memoir so people can read about maybe an experience similar to their own, maybe an experience that's very different from their own, but always a good way to understand someone else's, to just spend some time within those experiences and how those experiences have come to shape them. So if you're a fan of memoirs, then you may want to check this out. It is definitely a memoir, but it's also, it's got a lot of really good ways of looking at life and thinking about life, and it's got, elements of spirituality within it and how those experiences shaped Roger in his young years. So this may be something that you want to check out, or maybe there's someone in your life who would really love to read this book. Then you should definitely pre-order it for them, because I'm so glad Roger brought that up at the end, because I completely forgot to mention when we were talking to remember that it's not yet out, that it comes out June 6th. I sometimes forget as I'm reading advanced copies of books that they're not actually out in the world, because I have one, right? So my brain's just like, yeah, I have one. They must be available. Oh, thankfully other people's brains are a little more, or actually a little less Swiss cheese-like in this case. They remember things. So yeah, thank you to Roger for having a better memory than I do and for sharing his experiences with me. I hope that you're having a good week, and I hope that you will join me for the next episode. It is another memoir, but very different. It is called Daughter of Spies, and it is a memoir of a woman who tells of her experience growing up post-World War II, her American father, her British mother, and you know what? I just want to leave you with that, because Daughter of Spies is an intriguing title, and I want you to tune in and listen to the conversation so you can find out what exactly that title means. Is she really a daughter of spies? Does that mean something else? Well, you'll just have to come hear the interview. That author is Elizabeth Winthrop Alsop, and I'm looking forward to speaking to her. Hopefully you're looking forward to hearing that interview. In the meantime, if you could do me the things that I always ask you to do me, and if you have done them already, wonderful. Thank you so much. If you have not, please consider liking, following, subscribing, whatever on the platform that you listen to this podcast on. That means you'll always know when there's a new episode out. And then also, if you can leave a review, written or starred, both are wonderful. Both help me get the podcast out to listeners and readers such as yourselves. And then, of course, there is the social media option. You can follow on social media: Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. See? Memory, Swiss cheese brain. Almost forgot what social medias the podcast is on, but Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, you can find the podcast there, and I love hearing from listeners, so come find me and the podcast on social media. I hope you've had a great week. I hope you've got something wonderful coming up this weekend, whether that's going out and being social, staying in and not being social, whatever works best for you. I hope that you have time to do that. Regardless, as always, I hope that your time affords you plenty of opportunity to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.